Welcome to Women Writers in Chinese History. In this video, we'll go over some important concepts which I hope we can work through together during the course of this class. First, history, or more specifically, Chinese history. In this class, we'll mostly focus on the traditional period, or rather China's long dynastic past. As you can see on this chart, dynasties are the basic unit of Chinese history across almost 4,000 years. Even though today's China is drastically different, this long dynastic past defines some basic aspects of Chinese culture. Moreover, cultural memories about famous historical figures and events play an important role in shaping the Chinese national identity. For this reason, a knowledge about Chinese history is fundamental to any study about China. Even though China's last dynasty Qing lasted until 1911, or rather the February of 1912, when its last emperor abdicated, we often trace the beginning of modern China to the First Opium War from 1839 to 1842 between the Qing dynasty and British Empire. The Qing dynasty's defeat in this war marked the start of what's known as the Century of Humiliation, 百年国耻, in Chinese history, during which recurrent foreign invasions by the industrialized powers of Western Europe and Imperial Japan reduced China to a semi-colonized status. The Century of Humiliation forced Chinese intellectuals to assimilate Western influences and initiate systematic changes in Chinese politics, society, and culture, resulting in the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, which established a republic and terminated China's millennia-long dynastic history. 20th century China went through many seismic changes after the Republican Revolution. The feminist revolution in China was part and parcel of revolutionary movements during the Century of Humiliation. We will address the modern feminist movement and a few contemporary Chinese women writers towards the end of this course. However, as mentioned, our main focus will be on women writers from the long transitional period. One note I like to state at the outset is that feudal or fengjian, a term that is quite prevalent in modern Chinese publication in reference to the dynastic periods, is not historically accurate. The term feudal or fengjian gained currency during 20th century revolutions as a derogatory characterization for traditional Chinese society, meaning to attack the backwardness and repressiveness of its political and cultural system, similar to the implication of medieval in English. Yet, for about 2,000 years, Chinese history was characterized by a centralized imperial system that is very different from the feudal system, which in European history meant that the king entrusted his vassals to govern various territories relatively independently. As we shall see, a political system similar to European feudalism did take place during certain early periods in Chinese history and caused centuries-long civil wars. This was why the imperial system was established when the Qin dynasty reunified China in 221 BCE and lasted all the way to 1911. We'll look at this history in further details later on, but the gist of my point is that you should not use the term feudal indiscriminately in your writing, as it is ideologically charged and historically inaccurate. So I'm just going to let it fly away here to make a point. Admittedly, traditional is quite vague, but I'll accept it as a working concept. Imperial China is an objective description of Chinese history from the beginning of the Qin dynasty to the fall of the Qing dynasty. Or, better still, you can simply refer to specific dynasties or centuries, since we'll see that there is much diversity and change within China's transitional period. After this disclaimer, Let's first look at the concept of patriarchy. Whereas many of you must be familiar with the word as meaning male-centered or male-dominant, let's ponder on it a little more to get down to specific structures underlying women's subordination. For starters, we can look at the definition in Oxford English Dictionary. That is, patriarchy means a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. And here is another aspect of patriarchy, a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. Here the second definition is perhaps close to what many of us have in mind about patriarchy, that is, excluding women from positions of power. The comic shown here reflects this power structure still common in contemporary societies, including today's American society, by showing male executives sitting around the table with female assistants standing by while wondering why women are complaining about patriarchy. Of course, patriarchy in traditional China was even less subtle than situations facing women today, and has some distinctive features. First, gender inequality in terms of men are superior, women are inferior, 男尊女卑, was legitimized and normalized through the system of rituals, 礼. Simply put, rituals or 礼 regulate behaviors and positions of subordination or authority according to social roles and groups, and attach those codes of conduct to ethical and metaphysical claims. In other words, whether one conforms to ritual codes determines whether one is perceived as a good person or fulfills a sacred ordainment similar to a religious imperative. In the Chinese tradition, this ordainment is often presented as coming from heaven, 天. The ritual system was codified during the Western Zhou period around 10th to 8th century BCE and written in several classical texts, such as the Classic of Rituals, 礼记. This system was inherited and developed by Confucian thinkers during the later centuries. We'll talk about these developments in more details in other lecture videos. One basic principle of the traditional ritual system is the division of outer and inner spheres. The outer sphere means the public domain and socio-economic and political activities. It is exclusive to men. The inner sphere means the private and domestic domain, that is, the household. It's considered as the one and only sphere a woman should concern herself with. A woman's most important and only mission, in other words, is to serve as a housewife. Implied in this principle of inner-outer division is the segregation of genders, or rather the isolation of women from the outside world. During the traditional period, a woman, especially one in the upper class, was not supposed to reveal herself to the public or to anyone outside her household. After marriage, she is not even supposed to receive any male relatives in her husband's family. From a modern perspective, it's difficult to imagine a world where there are no women or girls on the street. Yet that would be the case one might expect in the setting of traditional China. Of course, it's also difficult to imagine being shut off from the outside world for the entirety of your life. Yet that was the life facing most women during the traditional period. At the same time, certainly not all women acted according to those rules. A women's history in China would have been incredibly boring. Yet these exceptions often risked being socially perceived as inappropriate and might cause damage to the woman's reputation or even legal punishments. In direct relation to the literary topic of our class, women's restriction to the domestic sphere means that education may not be considered as a natural right for her, since education and literacy by nature carry public functions, that is, as a means to communicate with others and express yourself. For most part, education was a male privilege in traditional China. The vast majority of women in Chinese history would have been illiterate, and the women who left writings behind, as the ones we'll study in this class, constitute an extremely small percentage of the general female population. While we should keep this context in mind, it can be said that this rarity renders their writings more fascinating and valuable, since they have been preserved against all odds across thousands of years in a cultural system where women were for the most part kept away from reading and writing. Also importantly, education in traditional China was directly correlated with political power due to the system of civil examinations, or keju, through which the imperial government selected officials based on exams on Confucian classics and current affairs. Civil examinations had its philosophical foundation in the Confucian principle of classical learning and moral self-cultivation, which we'll discuss more later. In comparison to aristocratic systems, one might say that civil examination is more progressive, as it implies a literary meritocracy through which one can achieve upward social mobility by effort and talent. However, this was a meritocracy exclusive to only half of the population, that is to men, while remaining off limits to women who were confined to the inner sphere of the household. For instance, on the painting on this slide, we can see many candidates anxiously waiting for the examination results. They're all men, and there was not a single woman in sight. Although in social reality, women couldn't find any opportunity for social advancement through civil examinations, we do have literary works penned by both men and women telling stories about cross-dressing women who found success in the examinations, that is, by winning the coveted first place or 状元 position. These stories are especially popular during the late imperial period, or the Ming and Qing dynasties. We'll look at some of these examples later in this course. After reviewing basic structures in the ritual system that excluded women from social and political power in traditional China, we should also know that the kingship structure of patriarchy, that is, descent is traced through the male line, is also of crucial importance for understanding women's subordination during the period. A more specific term for characterizing this aspect of patriarchy is patrilineal. The patrilineal kingship structure is still very prevalent in today's world. Just by the fact that family surnames are predominantly passed down from the father. However, in traditional China, the patrilineal kingship structure had much greater legal and social impacts, since it determined the inheritance of properties and titles. The imperial throne, for one, was always passed to a male heir, usually the oldest son. A woman typically had no rights to inheriting properties unless she acted on behalf of her son. Another serious consequence of the patrilineal kingship structure was that the woman, ever since she was born, would have been considered as a member of her husband's lineage, rather than that of her birth family. This was a major reason why boys were preferred in traditional China, since they had the ritual status to pass on the lineage, not only supporting his parents during old age, but also performing ceremonies to serve the spirits of the family's ancestors and those of his parents after their death. A daughter, however, would have been raised for for the sake of serving another family. Next, to state the obvious, a man could marry multiple women throughout the traditional period. However, polygyny may not be the most accurate word for this custom, since a man usually could only marry one woman as the principal wife, or qi, while taking multiple concubines, 妾. Therefore, the marriage custom in traditional China may be more precisely described as concubinage. In this system, the principal wife had the ritual status to manage the household and perform ancestral worship. If she had sons, her oldest son was usually the first in line to inherit the father's title and wealth, although the family's property could be divided among the other sons as well. Of course, it was not always the case. A principal wife could bear sons, which would have provided her husband with a rationale to take concubines, given the imperative of having male offspring to continue the family line. The custom of concubinage continued during the Republican era in the early 20th century. The well-known film by the fifth-generation director Zhang Yimou, Raise the Red Lantern, is a dark portrayal of the experience of a concubine during this period in a household full of vicious intrigues when several women competed for the favors of one man. Polygyny or concubinage was outlawed in mainland China since the 1950s, yet the structure of social power remains male-centered, and similar to other societies in today's world, the phenomenon of powerful and wealthy men taking mistresses continues. On this somewhat sad note, let us conclude this video. Please complete the quiz below the video and then watch the next video, which introduces several different groups of writing women in Chinese history, as well as some basic historical developments, including that about foot binding, the most notorious custom associated with women's oppression in traditional China.